So, welcome everyone. It's a couple of minutes after our start time, and it's my pleasure to bring back as our facilitator and discussion leader for today, Glenna Matthews. Glenna is well known to members of the Pickwick Club because she has been a discussion leader many times. Previously on Bleak House and other novels. And Glenna is herself a historian, the author of several books specializing in women's history and in particular women's history in California. She's published books you can find on Amazon uh, and it's an honor to have Glenna back, and I will turn things over to Glenna for today's discussion. So thank you, Glenna, for being here.
Well, thank you for the kind words. Let me begin by saying a couple of things by way of introduction. First of all, one of the many reasons I love Dickens so much is that each time I reread one of these novels, I get something new and fresh, and I see it from a slightly different angle. And I've always been fascinated by Esther, but this time I was particularly interested in the whole issue, which I'll bring up later too, of how Esther copes. I think her coping strategies are very interesting, given that she's had what we've all agreed on is this incredibly trying, traumatic, painful childhood, and bears the scars. Yet she has this really interesting set of coping strategies, I think. And the other thing that will lead me into the first quote I want to share, I'm just going to read it. It's not a slide. This is brief. I'm struck again by, I've talked about this on many occasions. I think of Dickens as, I've called him, not in writing, I'm not a literary scholar, but he seems like a poet of domesticity to me. The way he uses descriptions of houses so evocatively, and often you can read a description of it like an interior of a house, and it sets an emotional tone for that scene, how we're to react to characters. But not just the interior, the domestic, but the architecture, the outside of houses too. And I remember when we were talking about Dombey, John, you shared a description of the outside of the Dombey house that has a lot to say about what's going to be going on inside. And so I wanted to begin with chapter 39, the very first sentence or so of chapter 39. The name of Mr. Bowles, preceded by the legend ground floor, is inscribed upon a doorpost in Simon's Inn, Chancery Lane, a little pale, wall-eyed, woebegone inn, like a large dustbin of 2 compartments and a sifter. It looks as if Simon were a sparing man in his day and constructed his inn of old building materials, which took kindly to the dry rot and to dirt and all things decaying and dismal. And so here you see in this couple of sentences that he's talking about this building as pale and wall-eyed, like you would describe a human being. And so I just think he has this, to me anyhow, this incredible capacity to personalize buildings and interiors and use that to set the emotional tone of whatever it is we're about to encounter. And having said that, this first chapter, and I'm going to be a bit of a slave driver. Oh, I shouldn't say that. That's a bit of a taskmaster.
I'm gonna. There was one announcement I forgot to make, and so
Okay.
excuse me.
Please.
I just wanted to remind people that when Courtney sent out the invitation for today's meeting, she asked people to come prepared with a favorite passage from the assigned reading, and a passage that you thought was particularly interesting, like the one that Glenna just read, one that you thought was important, one that you found confusing, or one that you found funny. And Dickens, after all, is a comic writer, and Bleak House is not his best known comic novel, but it has passages that are very funny, I think. So uh, at some point, Glenna and I will invite people to offer particular passages that they selected as important, interesting, uh, funny for whatever reason. So excuse me, I should have announced that earlier, Glenna, and I hope you'll help me in inviting people to
Well,
offer
why
their
don't we why don't we ask is what I was getting at is I'm going to try and move through all 8 chapters because there's so many interesting plot points as we go through. But within each chapter, if people have a particular passage, that would be a good time to bring it up. And
good idea.
I was just going to say, chapter 39, we meet all kinds of really awful people. I mean, we really get to know Mr. Voles better, and we also encounter people who already come to probably dislike Smallweed and Tulkinghorn. So let's start the screen sharing. Yeah, so here's our first slide. And this is Richard Carstone telling Mr. Voles, oh, I used to have a high opinion, but now Jarndyce, blah. So who would like to read that out loud? Any volunteers?
Okay, if I sit here.
Sure, I'll go. I'll take a crack.
Okay.
Mr. Voles, if any man had told me when I first went to John Jarndyce's house that he was anything but the disinterested friend he seemed, that he was what he has gradually turned out to be, I could have found no words strong enough to repel the slander. I could not have defended him too ardently. So little did I know of the world. Whereas now I do declare to you that he becomes to me the embodiment of the suit, that in place of its being an abstraction, it is John Jarndyce, that the more I suffer, the more indignant I am with him, that every new delay and every new disappointment is only a new injury from John Jarndyce's hand.
So, and before we discuss a passage, let's look at the next slide, which is an illustration. Yeah. So there's Voles and Carstone in that office. And so anybody have any comment about this interchange and how Mr. Voles has worked on Richard to get him to this point and so on? And I can't see people very well, so I'll rely on Courtney or somebody to call on people.
Sarah?
Sarah and Jonathan. Sarah?
Sarah, you're muted.
Sorry. So in this interchange, Mr. Voles tells Carson like two conflicting things. On one hand, he wants to agree with him, so that's what appeals to Richard. But on the other hand, he wants to portray himself as not trying to tell him bad things about his guardian. Like, he's like,
Well, I think I don't know who's crackling there, but I think what you're saying is that I think here we see the cleverness of his manipulation, that he's pretending that he's trying to be fair, but he's in fact obviously the one that's been manipulating. Jonathan?
Jonathan, we can't hear you. Maybe turn up your volume. Barb?
Well, I said this last time, and I'll say it again. Dickens, he does such a brilliant job of portraying this man who has become entirely obsessed with this court case. And somebody in the chat indicated that that's the case seems somewhat unrealistic. Well, Dickens is satirizing this whole process, but I certainly have known several people who have completely become devoted to the idea that courts are going to save them and give them money. And I had an uncle who firmly believed that a person that was helping him was actually ruining him. And I just think the whole portrayal is so well done and sad. I mean, and Dickens makes it quite sad. I mean, every time he starts speaking, you think, oh no, what's he going to say now? Where is he going now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm so sorry about that. When I look at the illustration, the first thing occurred to me is that the paintings or I'm not quite sure what they are above Mr. Vole's head and above Richard reminds me of a cemetery. Or you have the icon or Westminster Abbey. You walk along and see the icons on top of the coffin sort of things. And also in the upper right, looks like a clock is on the top of a cupboard or bookcase, and it appears to be spider webs coming off of it. Anyway, so you have graveyard and spider webs and sort of decay and all that. So that's my immediate impression, John. I don't know if that's how it would be interpreted, generally, but it just looks that way to me. Thank you.
Great. I mean, yeah, I see what you're saying about the suggestion of cobwebs, and yeah, I mean that's commensurate with what it's dry as dust. It's a certain decay, and Mr. Vole's only hope for clients, it seems, is to be devious and manipulative. It's not like he has a thriving practice. Peter?
Yeah, let me take headphones out. Can you hear me here?
Yes.
Okay. At the very beginning of the chapter, we get a depiction of the place as being in decay. It's also like a very cramped sort of space. And the impression I get, and at a certain point, we're given a description of Voles as being kind of like a piece of lumber that's holding up a decayed building. That's actually a description of Tom All Alone's. And the issue of decay in this novel just keeps bringing to mind to me the fact that people are not taking care of business. They're, in a certain sense, they're letting things go, and they're not just letting things go. Voles isn't doing anything. Like his name is V. Holes, like he does nothing. He's a sort of black hole in which all these sort of resources that Richard has are being sort of funneled. So when I put those two things together, the idea of decay and the idea of like doing nothing, he's not really doing nothing. He's basically sucking all the resources down. There's a sort of like people who are there's a certain kind of activity that is kind of parasitic going on, and that parasitism is one of the major sources of decay, including like Tom all alones. Nobody maintains Tom all alones. They're just sucking up all the resources that would ordinarily, in a humane society, be dedicated towards maintaining things so that they're humanly habitable. So anyway, I think of this particular chapter as being kind of critical in the sort of like the economic logic of the novel, which is that as long as people are simply living off of other people's resources and not contributing to the maintenance of things, what you get is basically decay. And I even think of like the crampedness of Vol's office. It's like somebody hasn't built out the office so that it's humanly habitable. It's like they basically consumed the resources, or they're slumlords. He's got a business slumlord.
Look at how littered the floor is, and Janet points out that it looks like there's a rope.
Yeah, there's kind of a carelessness that generally is the carelessness of society in the novel.
So, Mary.
The name reminds me of a vole, V-O-L-E, a little animal who lives underground.
Yeah.
And generally is blind. And I think Mr. Voles is metaphorically blind to what's going on with Richard. I don't think he really cares, so he kind of prefers not to see certain things.
Right.
That's my take on it.
And Carl?
There were a couple of things in this chapter that I thought were fun. He keeps talking about how Mr. Voles is a reasonable man and repeats that over and over again so that you're pretty sure he isn't. And then the other comment is he makes a statement that the business of the law is to get business for itself. And that's, one of the overall themes of this book.
Right. Before we move on to the next chapter, is there anyone who has a favorite passage they want to share from this chapter? I said I was going to be a bit of a taskmaster. It's very interesting what you just said, Carl, because I was sharing before we got going that I'm listening to Pickwick. And of course, in Pickwick Papers, there's a famous lawsuit where Mr. Pickwick's landlady thinks that he's proposed marriage, and Dickens makes a big deal about her lawyers, Dodson and Fogg, and what creeps they are for taking this woman's case seriously and so on. So this idea that lawyers are in it for themselves is not a new one in this novel. Michael?
Hi there. Yeah, I had marked the respectability paragraph as one of my favorites. I loved how Dickens repeated that, and you all just mentioned it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you can read it, but it's, he's very respectable. So you do get that idea that maybe this is a stretch for this character, that he's not so respectable, but, we don't have any evidence so far. And then right after that paragraph, this is on page 621 of the edition, the one great principle of the English law is to make business for itself, which is really, the whole theme of the Chancery. There's no other principle distinctly certainly and consistently maintained through all its narrow turnings. And so, all of everything in the book in regards to the Chancery and the law has to do with them making business for themselves. And I equate it to, like in healthcare, would you go to a dentist that is not taking care of your teeth, but just keeps making things worse for you? And
Yeah, and of course we've seen Mr. Bowles over and over again talk about his aged parent and how he's doing everything for his kids and blah de blah, and it's just such a leitmotif. Jonathan, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just very quickly here, I can't resist this. Voles is a cannibal, and he gorges on other people, and this part of Dickens' sort of dark humor and irony is especially of interest to me. And I'll just read briefly here. The Chancellor is, within these 10 minutes, up for a long vacation. Mr. Voles and his young client and several blue bags hastily stuffed, out of all regularity of form, as the larger sort of serpents, or in their first gorged state, have returned to the official den. Mr. Voles, quiet and unmoved, as a man of so much respectability ought to be, takes off his close black gloves as if he were skinning his hands, lifts off his tight hat as if he were scalping himself, and sits down at his desk. The client throws his hat and gloves upon the ground, tosses them anywhere without looking after them or caring where they go, flings himself into the chair, half sighing, etc. And on the next page, it's our next 2 pages or so, we see just a wonderful reference here to coffins. Mr. Voles is rapping on his desk, and it says, Mr. Voles gives it a rap, and it sounds as hollow as a coffin. Not to Richard, though. There is encouragement in the sound to him. Perhaps Mr. Voles knows there is. And so I just share that with you, and he and the final thing is just the reference to his family, as if these poor people that he has to support, and it's there's absurd irony there, because the Vale of Taunton, from what I understand, is a luxurious one of the most beautiful areas of England, pastoral and beautiful, and so his poor father has had to live in this Vale of Taunton, and it just is, there's so much irony there. It's just wonderful. So thank you.
Great, thank you. John.
Yes, just a couple of things to add to the excellent comments that have been made. Other associations besides cannibalism are that Voles is the name is a homonym with VOLE, as was pointed out, and the vole is a small burrowing animal that has a tremendous appetite, and according to people who know more about voles than I do, eats many times its own weight in the course of a day. It has to devour things in order to stay alive. And so Voles is a cannibal. He's also a voracious predator. And of course, in the illustration, you can see the cat down at the bottom left that is waiting attentively to devour the mouse in the mouse hole.
Yes.
Yes, as it emerges from the. And Voles is vampiric. He's like an undertaker. He's associated with all manner of deathly and death-associated furniture and other habits. So he's both respectable, as undertakers often are, and catches all of those stereotypes.
Well, and the look on his face, that unctuous look, I hate to say it, but I have encountered a few undertakers with that kind of a look, and it's not particularly welcome. Well, let's move on to chapter 40 and to the next slide. And here, now we've gone from the cramped, dusty, cobwebby law office to the grandeur of Chesney Wold. And I think this picture is so evocative. And I don't have a quote from this chapter, but I mean, this is the chapter in which, as I put in my notes, Tulkinghorn tightens the noose with his story that is meant for the ears of Lady Dedlock. So this, as far as I'm concerned, this illustration has a kind of doom and foreboding about it that really anticipate the kind of fate that is about to be visited on Lady Dedlock. Karen?
Yeah, this is a chapter that I think has aspects about Chesney Wold that have everything to do with how you introduce the session, Glenna, with character being in a house being a character. I mean, the descriptions of Chesney Wold in this chapter are amazing. And to me, the most exquisite description of this house that is devoid of soul, it's absolutely frozen in the past and it is lifeless in the present. It's just dead. Begins on the very bottom of page 639 of the Penguin edition, and it goes on for a couple pages over to 642. And if I could just pick out key words even to trace this descriptive power that Dickens shows that Glenna talks about. Through some of the fiery windows, the light excluded at other windows pours in. Then do the frozen deadlocks thaw. The next paragraph, the sun is dying, the floor is dusky, shadow slowly mounts the walls, bringing the deadlocks down like age and death. The next paragraph, light mists arise, the dew falls, all the sweet scents of the garden are heavy. And the most descriptive paragraph, the last one on page 641, now the moon is high and the great house, needing habitation more than ever, is like a body without life. I mean, it's just so graphic and, you just feel it in your bones, don't you?
Yeah. And I mean, in this illustration, that's Lady Dedlock over the fireplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, that was, yes, absolutely. Does anybody, John?
Well, I agree with Karen. I think this is a marvelous descriptive passage. And Glenna, you keyed it at the very outset by talking about the psychology of architecture. And one other thing I would add to what Karen said is that this is a ghostly description. The pictures on the wall of the ancient deadlocks are coming alive and coming to be the ghosts that haunt the history of this house. And we have to acknowledge, of course, that the Bleak House is the title of this novel. And what does Bleak House refer to? There is a place called Bleak House, and we may discover other bleak houses, or the House of England is a bleak house. But I think Chesney Wold and the descriptions of Chesney Wold in this novel evoke some of the most powerful descriptive writing on Dickens's part. And it's a house that is haunted. It's a house that is already on fire from the setting sun. It's a sun that is setting and creating the illusion of fire, but also in historical decline. This is a historical novel as well as a novel about particular families and individuals. And I think it's important to read the house of this novel, the central house, as Chesney Wold, which is symbolic of the condition of England And remember that this chapter is called national and domestic. And I think those two terms are particularly resonant for the larger thematic structure of the novel, that it's a domestic novel about Esther and her childhood and her relationship to her mother. And the Esther plot is the domestic plot of the novel, but it's also a novel that's concerned with history. And the Ghost's Walk is the thematic keynote of the historical dimension, and Chesney Wold as the House of England in decline, in danger of collapse, of historical change as a result of the changing class structure that is described in this particular chapter. All of that is, I think, just results in some of the most beautiful writing that Dickens ever did.
I want to say, I think the chapters that are set in Chesney Wold have beautiful writing too, where he's talking about the class structure and making fun of but in such a brilliant way of the conversations and so on. And so, Michael.
Yes, thanks. And thanks for that, John. Very insightful. And I certainly agree that the way he's written that between the national issues and the domestic issues is very enlightening. I just wanted to point out something that I just found very funny. Talking Horn has arrived, and Sir Leicester's pontificating a little bit about Talking Horn. And it's just so out of character. Everybody starts for a gun is fired close by. It's almost like a foreshadowing. And then Volumnia, the cousins are there. She says, "Good gracious, what's that?" cried Volumnia with her little withered scream. This is on page 647. And my lady says, "A rat." And they have shot him. So important line, for the future. And I had to mark that and let you know that was one of my favorite parts in that whole chapter, because it's out of character for her. She doesn't usually respond. She's bored. She's behind a fan. She doesn't talk. But to point out that she smells a rat, I thought was very enlightening. Thanks.
Great. Barbara?
Well, back to the country and the house. We later have, after the election, Lord Dedlock talks about his election failed. He failed. Makes it entirely personal that the country would be backing his perspective on things. And we know his perspective on things from the beginning, that he wants his land to be fenced in. He wants his titles and everything to remain as they are, and don't let those lower class people interfere with it. And then when he finds out that Mr. George is part of it, it's like, who would think to do such a thing? So all these shadows and things are foreshadowing all that as well. All those wonderful deadlocks that are going to be toppled down.
Very good. Does anybody have anything else to say about this chapter before we move on? There are 8 chapters.
I have actually marked the conversation as an interesting passage.
Okay.
So I won't read the entire thing, just the lines. So they start talking about who is the owner now, who thinks he has the owner, because maybe it's not you, maybe the Iron Man, the Rouncewell, who won the election, feels that they have the owner. And they talk about, so he tells a story, and in the story there is a duplicate of Lady Dedlock, and there is a duplicate of Rosa, and there is a duplicate of the son of the Rouncewell who won the election, who is engaged to Rosa. So those are the duplicates, and he has duplicates for them in the story. And they start talking about honor, and he tells them, Dockinghorn tells them, you might be mistaken. It might be Rouncewell who doesn't want his son being involved.
Yeah.
And at that point, Sir Leicester stops and he says, my lady, let me suggest in reference to that young woman. And she doesn't let him even finish. She just starts talking. And she says, I have no intention, observes my lady from her window in a low but decided tone, of parting with her. She immediately reacts to this idea. And then Sir Leicester said, that wasn't my meaning, returned Sir Leicester. I am glad to hear you say so. I should not be surprised if they all voluntarily abandon the girl. Yes. Lover and all, instead of her abandoning them. Supposing she remained at Chelsea Ward under such circumstances. No, I think that's what Talkinghorn said. Talkinghorn said, I won't be surprised if they, okay. Yeah. And then he says, really, Sir Leicester, returns the lawyer. I state the fact why I could tell you a story. And then he starts with a story. With Lady Dedlock's permission, he starts the story.
Yeah.
And just one funny line is, a ghost story, asked Volomnia. Volomnia hopes that it's a ghost story. Real flesh and blood, Miss Dedlock. He answers to Miss Dedlock, even though Volomnia asks the question.
Well, no, Volomnia is a
His
deadlock.
answer, yeah, he is the Dedlock. And then he says, Talkinghorn says, I leave you to imagine Sir Leicester, the husband's grief, but that is not the present point. And of course, we know to the end that the husband doesn't have any grief. He doesn't even think it refers to him.
Yeah, of course not.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Well, that's a powerful.
So the entire way that he constructs the story is very, very interesting. And it's very, if we go back to the story that Guppy presented, they both research the same thing for different reasons.
Right. Well,
right?
And so this is why Lady Dedlock is so tortured by all this. But we'll be talking about the very next chapter is the big revelation. And Wayne has something to say.
Yeah, it's very interesting because even here and in the next chapter, we learn that the girl is the biggest concern. She said in the next page, can we save the girl? And in this chapter, she's trying,
Sarah, let's hold off on that until we formally get to the next chapter. But Wayne wants to say something about this chapter, I think.
Okay.
You're muted. There. You unmuted yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the illustration. How marvelously it's done. If you go back to chapter 12, there's a description of the portrait of Lady Dedlock above the fireplace when the sun comes into the drawing room and throws a shaft of light across her portrait. And here we are in chapter 40. The illustrator is recalling chapter 12 exactly. And I guess someone's mentioned that this chapter ends with that horrifying scene when Talkinghorn threatens Lady Dedlock with exposure.
And torments
I think someone
her.
probably mentioned that.
Yeah, no, that's what Sarah was just talking about.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to next chapter where there's this remarkable confrontation between Tulkinghorn and Lady Dedlock. In the next slide, who would like to, let's see, chapter 41. Well, that's after the big confrontation. Let's talk about one of the things I'm curious about that I want to bring to the attention. I mean, we know that this is a chapter where Lady Dedlock and Tulkinghorn have a conversation. What do you think Tulkinghorn's motives are? Jonathan?
Yeah.
Just in short, Tulkinghorn is even more evil, I think, than Voles. And he's sort of a collector of intelligence and collector of secrets. He's not the only one, but he his vast collection of secrets makes him feel powerful, and he seeks to have power over other people, and he's just a dreadful, despicable person, of course. And I think Lady Dedlock is brilliant in just basically, denying him that power over her, just saying, whatever you want to do it. And but there's something that, he again, he collects these secrets for just holding other people in fear. So that's all.
Well, great. I mean, what struck me when I was rereading this chapter is that he professes that his motives are protecting the household, and the reputation of the Dedlock family and Sir Leicester. But the way he, if that were his only motive, he wouldn't see the need to torture Lady Dedlock the way he's torturing her. And again, think of, he's of the family, but not really of the family. He's always got a place there because he's so valuable, but he isn't really one of them. And I just think there are so many subtle ways that Dickens shows exactly what his position is in this social hierarchy and why it might engender in a proud, ambitious man a lot of resentment. And Sarah.
So you asked what his motive is?
Yes.
You asked what the motive. Well, yeah, like people say in general, to gain control. And there is one line that is very funny, but I could learn from his motive by the way that he built the conversation, the story in the previous chapter. So he does want to break the relationship, I guess. She doesn't belong there. She's not in Leicester class, and he wants to break the relationship. But he really doesn't have any evidence. The guy who had more evidence was Guppy. And even he was looking for absolute evidence. He had a lot of evidence. He knew that Esther's last name was Hoden. What's his name? Hoden? Memo. And Tulkinghorn doesn't know that yet. So Guppy had more information than Tulkinghorn, but Guppy felt that still he doesn't have the complete evidence, and he was looking for the letters from Mr. Hoden, from Captain Hoden, right? But once he didn't have the letters, he assumed he doesn't have a case. So if Guppy didn't have a case, a legal case, Tulkinghorn definitely didn't have a legal case. So he built this story based on trying to hurt her by removing her from Rosa, and by threatening to tell people. it's not a legal case, but he can tell people and help the girl Rosa. So yeah, so I don't know at the end, other than cruelty and getting control, he has a specific motive, but he's successful more than Guppy.
Right. And
You
Peter,
see,
you had some,
she ignored Guppy, even though Guppy had all the evidence in the world except the letters. And once she came and told her the letters are burned, she should have known there is no more evidence. So why does she succumb so quickly to Talkinghorn?
well, he's a
Because
trusted family.
his power was in spreading the story. And I guess spreading the story is as damaging as proving it in court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peter wanted to say something.
Let me unplug myself. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This time through, I was just taken by the displacement of the action onto Rosa, how Lady Deadlock actually tries to protect Rosa from being, ground up in this whole, process of like the revelation of her. So she's trying to protect Rosa from something, so it's kind of like herself in a certain sense, but and kind of like Esther. So they're in it. So what was I thinking? Oh, Tulkinghorn gets a sense that there's something brewing in Lady Deadlock. That her desire to protect Rosa is an indication of her desire to be free from his influence. So he, as soon as he detects that's happening, he slams down on Lady Deadlock to make sure that she doesn't actually dismiss Rosa, that she doesn't actually free Rosa from the influence of this whole disaster that's about to happen. So it's that almost gives me the sense that he's actually more interested in power over Lady Deadlock than he's obviously interested in protecting the aristocracy. For some reason or another, he's shoring up the old system, the aristocratic system. But he also seems to have a really perverse motive to just have control over Lady Deadlock for the sake of having control over Lady Deadlock, and I see that in his reaction to her desire to save Rosa.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jonathan?
Very quickly, I have to amend my response before. I'm looking at John's book, Supposing Bleak House. And John, if I may, I'm going to read just a few sentences on page 59 of your book. Tulkinghorn does not really want to expose Lady Deadlock's secret, nor even use his power over her to manipulate Sir Leicester. What he wants is to possess Lady Deadlock, to add her to his store of sweet blushing secrets, and bring her up periodically to sip and torture with vampirish delight. Wonderful writing. And outwardly a misogynist who shuns and distrusts women, inhabiting a world only of men, Tulkinghorn is also a sadist who takes erotic pleasure in punishing women and keeping them under his control. Goes on, but that's fascinating, and I just happened to see that now, so had to give you a plug.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what we've been, and I've been trying to monitor. People have been saying really interesting things in the chat about the sadism and the misogyny. Before we move on to chapter 42, could we go back a slide? Because I did want to end with that slide from chapter 41. Who would like to read this slide? This is the last paragraph, I believe, of chapter 41. Any volunteers?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I'll read it. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
The same wan day peeps in at Sir Leicester pardoning the repentant country in a majestically condescending dream, and at the cousins entering on various public employments. principally receipt of salary, and at the chaste Volumnia bestowing a dower of 50,000 pounds upon a hideous old general, with a mouth of false teeth, like a pianoforte too full of keys. Long the admiration of Bath and the terror of every other community. Also into rooms high on the roof, and into offices in courtyards and over stables, where higher, humbler ambition dreams of bliss in keepers' lodges, and in holy matrimony with Will or Sally. Up comes the bright sun, drawing everything up with it, the Wills and the Sallys, the latent vapor in the earth, the drooping leaves and flowers, the birds and beasts and creeping things, the gardeners to sweep the dewy turf and unfold emerald velvet where the roller passes, the smoke of the great kitchen fire wreathing itself straight and high into the lightsome air. Lastly, up comes the flag over Mr. Tulkinghorn's unconscious head, cheerfully proclaiming that Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock are in their happy home, and that there is hospitality at the place in Lincolnshire.
So, what a resounding conclusion to a chapter where we know that the happy home is not exactly idyllic.
Yeah.
Mary, did you have something you want to say? Or Pat?
Yes, I do. I've been reading about Queen Victoria, and this is written after she's been the queen for 10 years. And there's been so much criticism of her connection with Lord Melbourne, is it? Someone who has English history in their knowledge base could help me out a lot here. But it's almost seems to me like we could take these names and we could convert them into a person who is either Victoria or in Victoria's realm. That 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 it's almost as if Dickens is writing the time that he's observing, because this is written about at the same time when Victoria was the queen for 10 years. I don't know. I may be all off with this, but it just keeps calling me. Okay, bye.
Thank you. And John.
Oh, this is such a wonderful section of the novel. I personally do not think this is an allegory about the relationship between Victoria and Lord Melbourne, nor is it a criticism of Victoria. Dickens actually is an admirer of Victoria. And when Victoria was the young queen 10 years earlier than this novel, he had he pretended that he was in love with Victoria. Very amusing letters that he exchanged with his friends about her. But I want to, thank you, Jonathan, for reading the passage from my book about Bleak House, because I do think that this is an exquisite moment in the novel. The plot, the question, the very good question that was asked of everyone: what is Tulkinghorn's motive? And we know that he wants power and he wants secrets, but this is a blackmail plot. Blackmail is when someone has a secret that they don't want to be known anywhere, and someone discovers the secret and uses that to gain control over the person who has the secret. But it's not immediately evident what Tulkinghorn wants. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want sex. He doesn't really want power over the government or over Sir Leicester's political influence or social position. He already has that. He's not interested in sex. He has enough money himself. He just wants to possess Lady Dedlock. And the key to this, I argue, is hidden back in chapter 22 of the novel, when one of the early passages where we get close to Mr. Tulkinghorn, and he goes down into the cellar, his wine cellar, to get a bottle of port, and he brings the port back up to his chambers in his law offices, and he sips the port. And it's the only time in the novel that we get close to Tulkinghorn, that we get past his facade of lawyerly reserve. We don't get inside his character. He's always seen from the outside. But in this moment where we see his secret pleasure in sipping that old port that he brings back up from his wine cellar, we learn something important about him. And you remember that, and we'll come back to this, that there's a painting of allegory on the ceiling of Tulkinghorn's office. And we spent a little bit of time talking about what the allegory in this novel is. And I think there are many different allegories. In a sense, Tulkinghorn has just given us an example of allegory by telling the story of a hypothetical situation where there's a lady who has fallen into disgrace and has a child, and the child, if the secret is revealed, it will hurt not only the reputation of the lady, but it will hurt the child as well. And this is an allegory about Rosa. And what he's doing is telling Lady Dedlock not only that he has her secret and has the power to reveal it whenever he wants, but that if he reveals it, it will be damaging to Rosa. And Rosa is Lady Dedlock's daughter substitute. Lady Dedlock has had a child, a daughter. She knows it is a daughter. And Rosa will suffer as a result of this. So Lady Dedlock is powerless to deal with Tulkinghorn, because if she does anything that he does not want her to do, Rosa will suffer. So that's one kind of power that he has over her. But the allegory that lies behind this, I argue, is the allegory that goes back to the Greek myth of Persephone. And in the myth of Persephone, Hades, who is the lord of the underworld, sends Persephone into Hades and keeps her locked up in Hades, but releases her occasionally to come into the upper world, and then sends her back down into Hades, to the underworld. And Tulkinghorn is that lord of the underworld. He's a mythic figure, and he wants to control Lady Dedlock and allow her to have her freedom to do to do whatever she wants, so long as she doesn't do anything to change her current situation. And it's a remarkable piece of blackmail, because the person who commits blackmail usually wants to gain something. But Tulkinghorn doesn't seem to gain any material or sexual or political power. He has all of those that he needs, but he doesn't have Lady Dedlock. And now he possesses her because he possesses her secret. So there are many allegories in this novel. One of them is a political allegory. This election that is taking place in the chapter is an allegory about the change in political power in 19th century England. The aristocracy is losing its hold on power. It's losing its hold because of the 1832 Reform Act, which has extended the franchise, and the new industrial class that is embodied in Mr. Rouncewell is gaining power. They've won a regional election, a district election, but they will soon control the power over England. And Sir Leicester is always thinking about the floodgates of society that will open, and they are opening. This is a novel that also reflects back on the Chartist movement, which is a working class movement to gain the right to vote, the franchise. And we see now there's a debilitated cousin who is in the background of this chapter and says this is the result of giving the vote to the mob, and the mob means anyone who's not part of the aristocracy. So again, there are many allegories that are working at this point in the novel. But Tulkinghorn is a sadist, and Tulkinghorn wants to possess Lady Dedlock.
Well, that's a good segue into the next slide. And now we're in chapter 42. We're in Tulkinghorn's chambers. Who would like to read this this passage? Any volunteers? Well, I'll read it. So saying, he unlocks his door, gropes his way into his murky rooms, lights his candles, and looks about him. It is too dark to see much of the allegory overhead there, as John just told us. But that importunate Roman who is forever toppling out of the clouds and pointing is at his old work pretty distinctly, not honoring him with much attention. Mr. Tulkinghorn takes a small key from his pocket, unlocks a drawer in which there is another key, which unlocks a chest in which there is another, and so comes to the cellar key, with which he prepares to descend to the regions of old wine. He is going towards the door with a candle in his hand when a knock comes. And of course, we'll find out who the knock is. But I just thought this, again, this is such a good characterization of the man who is so guarded, who has all these secrets that he keeps under lock and key. And he who is guarded and buttoned up is now in this chapter about to confront a character, Mademoiselle Hortense, Hortense, who is anything but buttoned up. So who would like to talk about this quote and then the byplay between Tulkinghorn and the disgruntled, to put it mildly, discharged maid? Anyone? Have anything to say about this?
If I'll just throw it out, and I think maybe John, you could talk more on this, but I think this is an example of what, John, you may have been referring to, that this is a view of Tulkinghorn that we rarely obtain or receive here from the narrator. And this is something of a very personal sort of part of what he, I can't find the word, but his aesthetic, his sort of enjoyment. And maybe you could, but that's, I think, what we're seeing here, that kind of a different side of him.
David Brownell, I just saw something you put in the quote. Why don't you raise your hand and say something out loud? Or not.
Oh, you say we can talk without raising?
No, I just noticed, Sarah, that David Brownell had put something interesting about Shakespeare's villains. And I wondered if he wanted to put it.
Okay, I'll say it. I was
Okay.
putting it in chat because it's off the track. There's a book about Shakespeare's villains with a wonderful title, Motiveless Malignity. I've never read the book, but the title is often in my mind, and Tulkinghorn seems to be a fine example of motiveless malignity.
Well, I think one of the things, I mean, that first chapter that we read, there's such a variety of villains in this novel. Skimpole, Tulkinghorn, Smallweed, some of them are buttoned up and some of them are flamboyant, and it's among other things, it's a remarkable array of all the different ways to be a bad person. And and often the writing is so striking. As I say, it's a pleasure for me, at least, to reread it multiple times. Does anyone have any? So this is the chapter where Tulkinghorn and Hortense have their interaction, and we find out that he got her to dress up and do the the kind of the pantomime to elicit a reaction and so on. And she's bitter because she wants more from him than he's given her. Does anybody have a favorite? Oh, I see. Ginny, you have your hand up, and then Sarah.
Yeah, I didn't have a favorite quote from that, but I thought this is great because Hortense is every bit up to taking on Tulkinghorn, whereas everybody else sort of cowers in his presence. She goes right at him and throws the money across the room and says she's not going to take it and that he's going to have to do something for her. And he tells her, she could end up in prison and being carried away on a board, and how they treat women in prison, and she's not going to like that. But she doesn't back down one bit. And I think that was a great confrontation in this chapter between Hortense and Tulkinghorn, that she was not going to be intimidated by him, whereas everybody else, cowers at all his secrets and things. She knows secrets, and she's willing to stand up.
Good point. Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so Tulkinghorn used Hortense when they interviewed Joe. So he made Hortense use a dress, the French dress that Lady Dedlock wore at the evening. So she was part of this scene, and she knew that it has to do something with Lady Dedlock, and she hates Lady Dedlock. She asks him, you promised me one of two things. Either you place me or you help me to find more information about Lady Dedlock. You know how much I hate her, and I'll do it. But if I follow what John described about the motive, it might not work well with his motive, because his motive is to leave Lady Dedlock alone and just kind of blackmail her, have some control over her. So he doesn't need Hortense in the picture anymore. and that's why I think he's so mean and determined and threatens her.
Very good. Peter, you had something you wanted to say?
Just briefly, a few months ago we talked about spontaneous combustion, and it seems to me that Hortense is another example of the French Revolution in condensed explosive force. You know that she's another case of spontaneous combustion in the novel. She doesn't have to worry about it because she's willing to blow herself up. She's a terrorist. So anyway, that briefly that I would associate her violent energy with that. And she's Dickens isn't entirely happy with that stuff, but he portrays it, So yeah.
I hadn't thought of her being the French Revolution in a character, but she is so combustible, that's for sure. And when she runs in an earlier chapter, when she runs across the grass, barefoot in a storm, we know that she's, when she's possessed by rage, she's kind of heedless of practical consideration, shall we say. Leslie?
Yeah, I have a quote, a description from earlier on in chapter 42 about Tulkinghorn, which I just think is wonderful. It's short. It's the lawyer, smoke dried and faded, dwelling among mankind, but not consorting with them, aged without experience of genial youth, and so long used to make his cramped nest in holes and corners of human nature that he has forgotten its broader and better reign. It says so much about his character.
Great passage. Yep. Anything else about chapter 42? I told you it was going to be a bit of a forced march. Anything else about chapter 42 before we move on? Well, then let's go to chapter 43. And this is the chapter in which John Jarndyce and Esther, and now we're in Esther's narrative, and they all visit the Skimpole residence. And I want to, I think this quote is really interesting. Can I get a volunteer to read this quote?
I'll read it.
Okay.
And I said I thought it was to be regretted that he had ever introduced Richard to Mr. Vholes for a present of £5. Did he? Said my guardian, with a passing shade of vexation on his face. But there you have the man. There you have the man. There is nothing mercenary in that with him. He has no idea of the value of money. He introduces Rick, and then he is good friends with Mr. Vholes, and he borrows £5 of him. He means nothing by it and thinks nothing of it. He told you himself, I'll be bound, my dear. Oh, yes, said I.
So I think this passage is really interesting. What does it tell us about John Jarndyce's character? I mean, he's generally a good guy, but I mean, the term willful blindness occurs to me. I mean, how does anybody else feel about this? That when presented with evidence that Mr. Skimpole is not behaving in Richard Carstone's best interest, he prefers to put construction on it that it exonerates, that exculpates Skimpole. What does anybody else have to say about this? Why does, I mean, John Jarndyce doesn't seem to fathom that extent to which Mrs. Jellyby neglects her own children. He seems to be blind to Mr. Skimpole's limitations. And what's going on there? Ginny.
Yeah, It's amazing to me how Jarndyce, he's such a nice guy that he doesn't think badly of anybody. And to me, Skimpole's like one of the worst characters in this. Like his whole way of going through life with, I don't understand money, I don't understand this, and he just sponges off of everybody, and nobody holds him to account because there's people like John Jarndyce that bail him out every time. And he doesn't realize, I think he knew he was doing a wrong thing introducing Rick to Mr. Voles and making all this happen, that it was a mistake. But I just, he just has, Skimpole drives me nuts. I just can't believe this man, how he, sponges off everybody. And yet Jarndyce is like, well, that's the way he is. That's okay because he doesn't understand anything. And he lets him get away with murder. And it's unfortunate because he only caused, Richard to just go even further down the drain.
Yep. Karen?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Ginny. I absolutely have the most disdain for Skimpole of any character. But I think this whole interchange expands what is present in the novel to me, and that is this whole notion of charity as a theme. And I think that we see Jarndyce practicing charity. He's very generous with Esther, with Ada, with Richard, but then he's totally duped by Skimpole. And I think what that says is that charity is complicated. And I think Dickens is trying to show us that. There are problems with institutional charity throughout the novel. We see Mrs. Jellyby and Mrs. Partigal. I mean, there's this inherent selfishness sometimes in a lot of charitable extension. And I think this troubled Dickens. He wanted to show authenticity in charity. And who does that come from? Nemo. I mean, he gives what little he has, which is absolutely nothing, to Joe. And
also Mr. Snagsby.
Yes, exactly. Same with Mr. Snagsby. And then we have, in contrast, organized charity, which seems always to be inadequate. So maybe what we're looking at here too in the novel is charity being representative of just basic morality, which is what I sort of get as the underlying theme.
Let's see. Peter?
I tend to think that Dickens wants charity to begin at home, and that it's like his idea is that you take care of people close to you. That there's an emotional component to it, that you can't be distant from the people you care for. Anyway, but and the Bagnets, the Christmas spirit is in the Bagnet family, and the interesting thing about the Bagnet, I don't know if it's in this reading or if it's in the next one, but the daughters are given this, ironically, they're given names like Malta and what is it, Quebec or something like that. Like they're given these really distant names, but they're treated as like daughters, they're treated as, so it's the reverse. It's sort of some ironic commentary on the Jellybys. they treat their daughters as they don't exist. But anyway, there's an irony there in the name of. Anyway, the Bagnets are kind of like the example of, for me, of what Dickens thinks of as charity. It's something. It's if somebody is in your immediate vicinity needs help, you take care of them as opposed to like worrying about something on the other side of the planet. Anyway.
And Betty, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, and I'm not used to doing this. It took me a while to get to figure out how to put the hand, but so I'm going to have to go back before when we were talking about Skimpole. Because there was a passage that I'd like to share that caught my attention because I couldn't understand why John Jarndyce liked Skimpole so much because I just thought he was a terrible person and so and just took so much advantage. And when Ada, so I'm using my iPad, but in this passage is when Ada asks him, why, what made him such a child? And I just thought it was an interesting response. He said, "Why," he slowly replied, roughening his head more and more, "he is all sentiment and susceptibility and sensibility and imagination, and these qualities are not regulated in him somehow. I suppose the people who admired him for them in his youth attached too much importance to them and too little to any training that would have balanced and adjusted them, and so he became what he is." "Hey," said my guardian, stopping short and looking at us hopefully, "what do you think, you two?" So it caught my attention because, throughout the novel, I've been wondering how he could be a friend of John Jarndyce.
So John Jarndyce has a ready-made explanation that
Right.
enables him to overcome. Jonathan?
It feels to me that I think Dickens lacks he doesn't trust governmental institutions such as the Circumlocution Office in Little Dorrit, Court of Chancery here in Bleak House, and there's probably many other examples. But what he does trust is personal agency. So I think I'm just restating what someone else just said, which is I think that's it. I think it's people who are charitable, Guster and Snagsby, and of course Esther, and others who can make a difference, and that's what matters.
Anybody else want to say anything about chapter 43 before we're getting there, folks? And yeah, I see all I'm looking at the quotes, the chat. People are really enjoying the points other people are making, so yay. While we're still in chapter 43, next slide. And so here's Sir Leicester visiting the Jarndyce household. And you can see Esther turning her head and looking befuddled, even though we don't see her face. And, at this point, Esther knows that Lady Dedlock is her mother, and she's terrified that Sir Leicester will look at her and recognize the resemblance. And so this whole encounter makes her then decide she needs to confide in John Jarndyce. And so let's if we analyze this illustration with the care that it deserves, we will never get through. So let's move on to the next slide, which is Esther's revelation. Do I have a volunteer to read this?
I will.
Okay.
This is Pat.
Yeah.
Yes, guardian, yes. And her sister is my mother. I would have told him all my mother's letter, but he would not hear it then. He spoke so tenderly and wisely to me, and he put so plainly before me all I had myself imperfectly thought and hoped in my better state of mind, that penetrating as I had been with fervent gratitude towards him through so many years, I believed I had never loved him so dearly, never thanked him in my heart so fully as I did that night. And when he had taken me to my room and kissed me at the door, and when at last I lay down to sleep, my thought was, how could I ever be busy enough? How could I ever be good enough? How in my little way could I ever hope to be forgetful enough of myself, devoted enough to him, and useful enough to others to show him how I blessed and honored him?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is this 8 chapters. There's so many important plot points, and now this closely guarded secret has been shared because Esther is terrified that she will be the unwilling means of disgrace to her mother, and she's again expressing her gratitude that Jarndyce handles the revelation with such grace, with such generosity. Does anyone have any comments or questions about this, and or anything else they want to add about anything that they want to share from chapter 43?
Can I just ask about the visit of Mr. Leicester Dedlock? It happened so long after the visit occurred. It almost seemed to me out of place. So did it have a special meaning? Maybe they try to show that they go on with their life as usual, like.
That's an interesting question. That why does Sir Leicester show up at this particular juncture? John Jordan, do you have any comments about that?
Well, no, I don't have any particular observations about it, but it is the first time that Sir Leicester has been in the presence of Esther, and if he were to see her face, he would be in on the secret himself. So that's why Esther is so careful to hide her face, both in the illustration and in the text of the narrative. She doesn't want him to know. And one of the observations in the chat that is very good is that we didn't touch on is that Lady Dedlock's motivations is not just to protect Rosa, but to protect her husband. And Sir Leicester has largely been a figure of satire up to this point, but we need to keep our eye on Sir Leicester. What is Sir Leicester's role, particularly in relation to the secret? Will he ever find out the secret? And here's a close encounter that could reveal something to Sir Leicester, but Sir Leicester is not particularly observant in the way that, Guppy or.
But at this point, Esther may or may not be. We don't really know quite what to believe about how disfigured she is.
Yes, this is true.
Ginny.
I thought it was interesting that we suddenly had this connection between Lady Dedlock's sister and Boythorn, that they were engaged, that we suddenly realized that that's why they never, she never married, that she took Esther and went off and raised her, giving up the man she loved, supposedly, as well as he never understood why she left. And that's sort of an interesting thing about how bitter she was, the aunt, how bitter she was and how she raised Esther, being so mean to her because she gave up something, and yet her sister got to marry somebody of worth and became, the head of fashionable intelligence, and be able to do so many things. And she gave up everything to raise the baby, and yet never told her sister that Esther was alive, that she lived, and that she just disappeared and raised this child, and they separated. But I thought it's interesting that they brought this tie into Boythorn, who lives next door, and that's sort of, part of the problem why they don't talk.
Good point. Well, I'd like to move on to chapter 44, unless somebody else has a particular issue. So let's talk about chapter 44. In this chapter, this is when Jarndyce proposes to Esther by a letter, And those of you who are reading it for the first time, did this come as a big shock to you, or how did you feel about it? And then I wanted to think about this quote. I mean, again, I think this chapter is very revelatory about Esther and her, what I call her coping strategy. So, in fact, I'm going to read the quote myself. Then I went on to think, this is after she's gotten the letter. Then I went on to think as I dressed my hair before the glass, how often had I considered within myself that the deep traces of my illness and the circumstances of my birth were only new reasons why I should be busy, 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 useful, amiable, serviceable in all honest, unpretending ways. This was a good time, to be sure, to sit down morbidly and cry. So she has a choice. She can either put her nose to the grindstone, be, Dame Durden, keeper of the housekeeping keys, or she can give in to her feelings and sit down morbidly and cry. And Esther, being Esther, she elects to be busy, busy, busy. And so my questions are, what do you think of the proposal? And I'm particularly interested if anybody who's reading it for the first time, how they would respond. And then what do you think of Esther's coping strategy? And does it ring true to you? I have to confess, this time when I was rereading it, Esther's admissions to herself struck me. They just really rang true to me, but you don't have to agree with me. So the floor is open for questions or comments. Patricia.
Yeah, sorry guys. It's 11:30 here, or 11:33 in Paris, so I'm probably not functioning particularly well. But I actually think that it's a combination of, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. So I'll start crying straight away, and then I will press on and become totally busy and totally happy. And I think that is a little bit of what this passage that you read so beautifully is all about. Because I do think that must be the feelings that Esther has going on in her head.
Very good. Michael?
Yes, I wasn't surprised because we had that prophecy from Mrs. Woodcourt about her marrying an older man. And so if you recall, I don't remember exactly what chapter that was, but this was my second read. My first read, I didn't remember all the details, but I did remember that prophecy then by the time, we came around to John Jarndyce proposing to her. And then I was thinking yesterday a little bit more about it, and the whole May-December aspect of the relationship. And I didn't really know how in Victorian times was that accepted, but look back and you hear of historical figures of 60-year-old men marrying 20-year-old women. So I guess it was acceptable. And then I was also wondering about Dickens kind of working through his own issues. Wasn't this the same time that he was leaving his wife? And I don't know exactly when Ellen Ternan came into the picture, but she was 19, I think, and so kind of working through those issues too as an author. So those are the questions I had, and what came to my mind as I was reading about this. I thought Esther's reaction was, for the Victorian times, probably appropriate and seemed natural. I think in today's world, for somebody to get a letter, a proposal, most people would probably be insulted by that. You couldn't ask me in person, and that's kind of the way we would take it now, and you would expect an answer at least within some reasonable time, and not by letter. Those are my thoughts.
Anybody else want to volunteer? I think we've gotten hints all along that she's sweet on somebody else. And so, I mean, the whole proposal by letter is, I think, not the issue for her so much as the fact that she, even though she's convinced that in her ugliness, her earlier dreams of Mr. Woodcourt are unrealistic, but hope dies hard, as they say, and were she to marry John Jarndyce, then that would be over, and so she's conflicted, and that's why she would want to sit down morbidly and cry, because she would be crying over her lost dream. But I think, to me, the reason this passage means so much to me is I think that the brilliance of Dickens' characterization of Esther and the brilliance of the narrative structure, if it didn't have this narrative structure where you get some first person from Esther, then you wouldn't get the way she's dealing with things. It's like, I'm upbeat, I'm of service to other people. And I think that when it seems very true to me that when you have just so much pain in your life and you decide, well, I can't let it destroy me, I've got to move on, then constantly talking to yourself about you can do better, you're busy, of service to other people. That's how you would get through your days, not to be completely overcome by depression and paralysis of will because you had been so traumatized. And so I find this, and what I said, this rereading, it just really came to me. I've long been interested in how she's scarred by her upbringing and how we learn. I feel I've learned to look beyond what seems maybe on a first glance to look insipid is coping strategy. And I think in this passage, to me, it just crystallized that. Ginny?
Two things. One, when this crying with the fact that she took the flowers that Woodcock had given her and tore them up and threw them in the trash, sort of saying, okay, I'm done with this now. I'm going to accept John's proposal. And, Woodcourt's was a dream and it's over. And that's, the whole idea of her being so conflicted, as you said, about, why she's accepting. But I also thought the proposal by letter by John Jarndyce was such an incredibly kind thing to do, because what's worse than having somebody ask you to marry him right to your face and you aren't even, you're like shocked, you weren't prepared for it, or maybe you were prepared for it, or you don't know how you want to answer. It avoided all that embarrassment by his writing the letter and being so clear that if it was something that she didn't want to have happen, just don't say anything anymore, that she wasn't forced into a situation of embarrassment if she was going to turn him down, and he wouldn't be embarrassed. And of course, that's why he never brought it up when, she kept wondering when he was going to mention the letter. He was never going to mention the letter. And I thought that was a really kind way for somebody who's older, asking this young girl to marry him, to, put it in a letter. And if she never says anything, life goes on exactly as it was, and there'll be no problems between us. And that sort of rarely happens once somebody proposes and the relationship isn't going to work out. So I thought that was great that he did that.
Thank you. Peter?
Oh yeah, I get the sense that even though John Jarndyce is like a pretty passive character, I think there's a sense in which Dickens thinks that goodness is completely selfish or disinterested, and that Jarndyce rises to the level of that sort of disinterestedness. He wants to marry her. It's kind of, it annoys me a little bit that he's so passive, but I think Ginny was right that he says that nothing will change between us if you say no. meaning that his love for her is completely, purely self-interested. Whether or not she loves him back, he doesn't care, but he apparently he claims not to have, and that nothing will change. So anyway, that's selflessness. I think that's pure selflessness strikes me as a little bit of a problem, but I think Dickens wants to represent that as kind of the essence of morality or goodness, that you're solely concerned for the other person's well-being, and that you could care less, what the consequences are for yourself. So there's I don't know. Maybe I should just quit and let somebody.
No,
else
I think
take it.
that's very interesting. Patricia, you have your hand up?
Yeah, only because what Peter says might also be a little bit of self-protection for John. He still wants to be friends, but he also doesn't want to put her on the spot immediately to say, oh, yes, of course, or, oh, dear, I need to think about this. And so I'm kind of thinking that there may, believe it or not, an element of self-protection and wanting to maintain the relationship, as Peter mentioned. So I think that's valid.
Good point. Well, we have 18 minutes left. Does it, and 2 more chapters? And does anyone have anything more to say about chapter 44?
Could Esther say no?
Good question. I think it would, from my standpoint, it would be very, very difficult when she feels so overwhelmingly grateful. It would be difficult to say no. But it does cost her her dream.
Does she love him?
In a non-romantic way, I would suggest.
Yeah.
Pat has her hand up.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I really don't like this whole thing. Okay. So I'm taking the opposite view. She is saying, okay, I'm the what does he call her? The little woman. I will continue to be the little woman. And Jarndyce, I don't, he has more power, although he doesn't like wield it like with a stick or anything. But it bothers me that she would put herself in that position, to allow herself to continue to be labeled as the little woman, the cute little woman, or whatever he calls her. But that's only my theory.
Sarah?
I just want to mention that at some point she brings up a question to herself, and she asks, what if he would have married somebody else? How will it affect me? So she's also practical in this story.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. So as we say about a lot of things, it's complicated. Her emotional response is complicated, and she has great points here that she takes practical considerations into account. So let's move on. I think we may get there. Chapter 45. This is where Esther visits Richard because she knows that things aren't what they should be, and she is not sure that any intervention is going to do much good. But this chapter is also important because Alan Woodcourt reappears. and pledges that he will look out for Richard. So does anybody have anything that they want to bring up out of chapter 45? Jonathan?
Just very quickly on the second page of the chapter, it's back to Voles again, and I just can't resist this very quickly. This is, it's not so much the cannibal here, but it's the grotesque that Dickens created in Voles, and Dickens loved grotesque things, as you probably all know. And it says, "Mr. Voles," said my guardian, eyeing his black figure as if he were a bird of ill omen, "has brought an ugly report of our most unfortunate Rick." And he goes on to say, "I sat down between them. Mr. Voles remained immovable, except that he secretly picked at one of his red pimples on his yellow face with his black glove." And it's just wonderful, the parallelism there. And just Dickens is probably smiling as he's writing that. And the phrase "bird of ill omen," it struck a chord with me. And I know it's in Dombey, and he uses it to describe Mrs. Pipchin, who, of course, is a witch with a hooked nose, which is good. But I thought there was other examples in Dickens. I can't find them right now, but of his use of that term. And I found out that it actually goes back to Greek and Roman mythology of a bird called Strix, Strix, which fed on human blood. And the bird of ill omen term is also used in Macbeth, Henry VI. And of course, you think of Dickens' Raven, which is a bird of ill omen, right? Called Grip, and then Poe and the Raven and all that. So it's very interesting phrase, I have to say.
Great point.
And I saw Grip in the Free Library of Philadelphia, the wonderful Dickens collection. He's still there, stuffed.
Does anyone else have a comment about chapter 45? I don't want to pay it too little heed, but chapter 46, which we're coming to, is the one where we're no longer in Esther's narrative. So before we part with Esther in her narrative, any further thoughts or comments about Esther or her dilemma? Well, then let's go to Tom All Alone's. And here we have this truly grim illustration. So let's talk about the illustration a bit. And those of you who know something, was Tom All Alone's based on a real place, or is it an imagined place? I'm sure there were places like this in Victorian London, but did he have a particular venue in mind, or was this just an imaginative description of an amalgam of places that he encountered that were poverty-stricken and decrepit?
It looks like it's the slums of St. Giles, but that's just, I don't think there's any real world. Dickens was thinking of one specific place, but so that could be sort of the slums of St. Giles, perhaps.
Okay, Patricia?
Actually, I think it's one of the old city churches, and it's down one of those old alleyways. If I did a really serious look, I could probably figure out which church it was. I'm not sure it's St. Giles, but it's definitely one of the old city churches. And all of those alleyways throughout even Holborn, where Dickens was living at the time, or most of the city, looked pretty much like that. It was pretty grotty, if the truth be known. And so, yes, I mean, it's perfectly normal and expected.
And I just on the chat about Dickens visiting. I mean, we know that Dickens walked the city. I made me think of think the late literary critic Alfred Kazin wrote a book entitled A Walker in the City. Well, Charles Dickens was definitely a walker in the city, and hence his capacity to describe the city in such vivid ways. Let's move on to the slide, the next slide, to the quote. And this, is there anyone who is willing to, that's Dame Durden is a traditional English folk song. Thank you. I have wondered about that. Thank you very much. Who is up for reading this passage?
I'll read it if you want.
Thank you.
But he has his revenge. Even the winds are his messengers, and they serve him in these hours of darkness. There is not a drop of Tom's corrupted blood, but propagates infection and contagion somewhere. It shall pollute this very night the choice stream in which the chemist on analysis would find the genuine nobility of a Norman house, and his grace shall not be able to say nay to the infamous alliance. There is not an atom of Tom's slime, not a cubic inch of any pestilential gas in which he lives, not one obscenity or degradation about him, not an ignorance, not a wickedness, not a brutality of his committing, but shall work in retribution through every order of society, up to the proudest of the proud, to the highest of the high. Verily, what with tainting, plundering, and spoiling, Tom has his revenge.
Thank you. And of course, that encapsulates one of the major themes of the novel, that the connection between Chesney Wold and Joe the crossing sweeper. And again, it's such vivid prose. And so, by gosh, I think that's, if not the last, one of the last passages in the last chapter. So now we don't have to rush. We can take whatever time we want to talk about chapter 46. Does anyone have any other passages from this chapter they would like to bring forward? Or any comments about this chapter? This, excuse me, this passage. John, I'm going to put you on the spot.
One of the backgrounds to this part of Bleak House is Thomas Carlyle's past and present, a long analysis of the relationship between England's historical past and its present. And running through that story, through that analysis, that piece of social analysis, is the story of an Irish widow who is herself not ill, but she carries the disease of scarlet fever. And she works as a nurse, I believe it is, and infects people of higher classes. She's a poor woman. And Carlyle uses that analogy of disease to argue that society is an organic whole, that the bottom of society is closely connected to the top of society. And Dickens takes that metaphor of disease and the fact of disease to argue that there is not a separation of classes, but that the nation of England is an organic whole in which the bottom is connected to the top. And illness proves that. But there's another dimension of Dickens's adaptation in this paragraph that is different from Carlyle's analysis. It's not just that the society as a whole is full of connections. It's that the lower class, those in Joe's condition, have their revenge, and that there's a conflict within the apparently organic nature of society, in which the lower class is aware of and resists their own oppression. So Tom, this abstract Tom, who is Tom? Tom is the generic name for the place, the slum, in its solitude. And that class has its revenge against the upper class structure. So behind the message of everything is connected is the tension between the lower classes and the upper class, the hostility and the possibility of revenge. And I think it's in that context that we might think about the French Revolution, Hortense, and going back to Our Dear Brother, the inquest at the early part of the book, after Nemo has died. So class resentment, class hostility, as well as an argument for the connectedness of the entire society.
I see Mike has his hand up.
Yeah, I guess I would disagree with that, John. I think this is an evasion of class conflict. And you think of the I'm thinking of Sontag and illness as metaphor. By transposing class conflict into the metaphor of illness, the political context now is Chartism, right?
Yep.
The 1848 revolutions, excuse me, and the parliamentary inquiry into the causes of cholera and the discovery of the pump in St. Giles, I think it was, is the origin of a contagion that spread across London and then further afield. This is the classic, it's the classic critique of Dickens, right? He elides the real political conflict. Illness is a metaphor, politics is the reality. So that's where I would come out. This is not about, the language of the Communist Manifesto would put this in rather different terms.
Well, that's an interesting conjunction. I forget, does this novel come out after?
It's 1852.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So Dickens knows about the revolutions, and I don't know whether does anyone know, has he read Marx? He's read Mary Barton.
Marx read Dickens, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's what I figured. But Mary Barton is 1848 as well, right?
Yeah.
And so
but I think this is an escape from politics, John, not an engagement with it, I think.
The politics is there. And the politics is in that visit that Mrs. Pardiggle and her children make to the brickmaker's home. And the brickmaker says, "No, we ain't read the pamphlet that you left for us." So there's resistance.
Let me just say that this is a period, as an American historian, I mean, in 1848, obviously, not only are there revolutions across Europe, but that's the year that gold is discovered in California. That's the year of Seneca Falls, where the first public call for women having the vote in this country. And in 1852, that's the year Uncle Tom's Cabin is published. And so there's all kinds of ferment about social issues, not only involving class, but in this country, race and gender. So all kinds of verities are being questioned in this period. And it's very, very interesting. Apparently, I have to tell one anecdote. I know we're out of time, but I will shut up momentarily. Has anyone here seen The Coast of Utopia, the great trilogy by Tom Stoppard? Well, one of the major characters in that is the Russian thinker Alexander Herzen. And when I was recovering from hip replacement, I read his book, his life story, and he says that he, a Russian revolutionary would-be, was a disappointed observer of the unsuccessful revolutions in Europe, and that shortly thereafter, James Buchanan, who would become president of the United States immediately before Lincoln, and who was, not a good guy, not strong on issues having to do with slavery. He had, when he was ambassador to London, James Buchanan had a number of the Russian or other European revolutionaries to the embassy in London and feted them. And Herzen says in his book, so the defender of black slavery had the red revolutionaries over to celebrate them. And I just think the fact that all of this ferment is going on at this time on both sides of the Atlantic, and this novel comes out of that, is an interesting point. Well, I'll shut up now. Thank you, guys. I really, really, really enjoyed what people had to say. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenna. See you next month. We're getting toward the end. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you.